Greetings. A little while ago, I did a video called Flipping Normals and Other Quick Tricks with the DAZ Studio Geometry Editor. And I got a follow-up question based on that video from a person that was wanting to know how to hide geometry in a clothing item, and most specifically a old clothing item, pre-weight mapping. In that video, I take a sphere and I cut out a bunch of it and delete the faces to make a sort of half sphere or amphitheater background. And that works okay on props, but on clothing items, if you delete faces, it doesn't work so well. What ends up happening is studio clothing items typically have a bunch of morphs that are linked to them that make them fit the different dials of your base character. And when you delete faces, Studio does not update the morphs to know that those faces have been deleted. And so while it looks okay that first time around, when you go to reload the scene later, you find that the object explodes because you have a bunch of morphs trying to reference faces that no longer exist. So I'm going to use this dress as a working object for demonstration here. It's got, as one can see as I float over it, a bunch of different material zones that have already been defined, and so that'll help speed things up. And what we're going to do here is, let's say that on this particular dress, we like the dress itself with the little sort of flowery bits of it, but we don't want the top half of it because we want to replace that with some other top. So we need to get rid of these two material zones, the top and the middle. So if I go over to the geometry editor and do have it selected, and so expand surfaces, so we have the top and we have the middle, right? And if I just toggle off their visibility within Studio, it looks like they're gone, and if we export this for rendering, they won't be there. But then when you go to reload this scene, it'll all be back. And that's because of sort of a philosophical view of how DAZ sees the geometry editor as really a content creation tool. And so when you're hiding faces, they're looking at it as you're trying to hide faces that are maybe in the way of getting at other faces that you're trying to work on. So face hiding is not something that they store persistently. They assume that when you reload this object, you're going to want all the faces back, that the only reason you've turned them off is to facilitate working on other faces, and you're done. So like I say, if I save this and reload it, which I won't do for the interest of time, we'll get back the top. So the next thing one could do is you could say, well, I know that I always am going to want to hide these two things. I could go over to the top here, and I could set the opacity to 0 and get rid of it. That's not super ideal because the geometry is still there, and so when you export it to, say, things like LuxRender, which is the rendering engine that I use, if I have loaded another top, and I know this is stylistically is not a top that will match with this, but it's for the purposes of time and convenience. So if I hide these, what'll end up happening is you'll note that the two tops intersect each other, and some rendering engines have trouble with intersecting geometry like that, and you end up getting rendering artifacts. So even if I had gone over here and set the opacity to 0, the geometry is still there and can interfere with what it is you're trying to do. So that's not really an ideal situation either. Well, another approach we could take is we could say, well, I'm going to turn both of these on. I'm going to say select the middle, and I'm going to say select the top. And now I'm going to create a surface from selected, and to make it easy for me to remember why I've done this, I'll do hidden. And this also has other benefits in that, say that the geometry you want to hide is not aligned with an existing material zone. I'm doing this because it happens to be that it's convenient, but say I was to pick something that will come down here on the bottom, and I will draw in a few, and I will add these to my hidden surface. So now when I turn off my hidden surface, I lose those geometry items as well. Not really probably what you'd want to do for this particular dress, but depending on what your item is, you may be trying to slice up an existing material zone. So by reassigning all this stuff, you can do the hard work of making sure you've selected the exact faces you want to hide once, and then assign them to this hidden zone. And now I can turn off that hidden zone and then do whatever, do my export. The drawback here is that when I reload the scene, hidden's going to be visible again. I at least have the shortcut of I don't have to worry about reselecting everything. I can just turn it off, but it's still a bit of a nuisance because if you reload the scene, it comes back. So it'd be really ideal to not have to deal with that. And so the best way requires that the object be weight mapped. One thing about this is this will work no matter what with any object. Doesn't even have to be a parametric. It could be a prop, parametric / figure. It could be a prop. It'll work with anything, but it requires you to manually rehide stuff when you reload it. Because I have made changes to the assignments here, I'm going to delete this real quick and load it again. So as you saw, this is a CR2, it's a poser file. This particular dress, one of the reasons I'm also using it for examples is that this dress has a bunch of custom bones in it for posing. So like if you're trying to make the figure look like they're mid-walk or whatever, you can do so. And those are obviously important to this figure. It also will have, all these different morphs that are follower morphs for the underlying figure, and those are important as well. So if I go up here and I say edit, rigging, convert figure to weight mapping. DAZ prefers weight triax, so that's the default. We're going to select that. And now if I expand this again, you'll see that I haven't tried to auto fit this to a weight mapped figure like a Genesis or G2 or G3 or whatever. This is still got all of its bones. I can do the same bends as before. And if we look here at properties, it's still got all of the body conforming morphs, and those will actually still auto follow your figure, at least for most legacy clothing. Depends on how it was built. Sometimes the auto follow stuff breaks or other issues, in which case this asterisk might be not the thing. It might be better to just use the reassign to a hidden surface and remember to hide it. In this case, this dress does work fairly well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm still in the geometry editor. I'm going to go, well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to create a primitive. It could be anything. I usually use a little sphere. And that primitive comes in as a prop initially. So we need to also convert it to a weight map figure. Sorry. Hit the wrong one. Convert prop to figure. And what we're going to do here is actually use a function of weight mapped geometry that DAZ added to support geografting. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to say hide faces from this weight mapped figure because I would be replacing them with a geographed, except that we're not going to replace them. So the net effect is they become invisible. And I'm going to rename this to dress facet hider. So if I go back to my dress and I go to the geometry editor, and I don't want to hide them, but what I want to do is I want to select them. So I'm going to select the top and the middle. And now if I right click here, I can say geometry, and I can do that again, like if I wanted to select out other bits, I can any face I want, and I go set auto hide faces for attachment. And I'm going to pick that facet hider I created. Pro tip, I've found that sometimes if this facet hider is not at the root level, DAZ won't find it. If it's not a weight map, if you forgot to convert it to weight map, it's not going to find it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say fit to, and I'm going to fit it to the dress, and voila, it removed the geometry for the sections that we don't want and left the rest of it alone. And if we save this file and reload it, we will get back exactly what we see right now. Now, another thing you'll note, so here is that sphere. We don't really want that sphere floating around as geometry in our final render either, so we can turn it off. That setting will be remembered, and then we could also parent it to the dress. I will add another tip here. So say that you are working on refining, in this case, it was easy because we just made use of a couple of matte zones for demo purposes. But say you are picking out specific faces yourself because the existing matte zones don't align with what your goal is. So for example purposes here, let's say I also want to get rid of, it happens to be the frill here at the top. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is that when you do that assign, set auto hide faces for attachment, that is a full replacement of the existing auto hide faces. So if I was to just select this bottom layer, so select, and I do my set auto hide, and I pick that dress value. Now the first thing you'll notice is nothing changed. And that's because DAZ doesn't actually do anything until you actually unfit and refit. And you'll note that what ended up happening was we got our top back because I hadn't reselected the top. So I'm going to set this to none for the moment so we see everything. We go back to the dress. Now in the dress, let's say, I'm going to say clear for demonstrations. One of the things that DAZ lets you do, actually I should have left that fit. So I'm going to say back. When this is fit to the dress, in the geometry selection, select by, why did that not pop up? Geometry selection, select by, see how there's this follower auto hidden faces that now shows up. And if I select that, what that just did is it selected the faces. We can't see them because it's currently not showing them, but you'll note that like the minus to deselect them on that material zone is now the thing that's highlighted because they are in fact all selected. And so I'll select these other two and I'll say overwrite on the auto hidden faces. And so again, now if I come here and I unfit and then refit, they're all gone. So I hope that was helpful. They say basic tricks here are things to keep in mind when you hide stuff with the visibility feature in geometry editor. That is not saved persistently because DAZ assumes that what you're trying to do is work on, say, underlying geometry that's the geometry you're hiding is getting in the way of. But you can hide stuff in a couple of ways. If you cannot use a weight mapped object, then you could assign all the faces that you want to a new matte zone, call it something like hidden, and then each time you reload, you're going to have to remember to go and set the visibility of that hidden zone to invisible. A little bit of a pain. If you are working with a weight mapped object, including converting old clothing to weight map, but still leaving it as parametric so it will still conform to older figures like a V4, then you can use the trick of assigning auto follower faces that will be invisible. Again, you're abusing the geografting feature of Studio's weight mapped up meshes. And when you save and reload this, it will come back with all of your stuff hidden. If the stuff you're trying to hide, the geometry of the item, like we saw down here, the dress is actually fairly coarse quads. If you need to hide half of a quad, well, the only way you can do that is with a transparency map, and creating transparency maps is a whole nother ball of wax. So hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks. Cheers.